1 week season.
Welcome everybody to week 3 of Soloship. I'm Squirrel Patrol from 444 Football. I'm joined by JM DeWin from 1 week season. JM, we touched on the Lions and Bears last week during the show. That ended up being one of the games you had to have. How was your week 2?
Yeah, my week 2 was okay, not great. I saw you. Was it last week? Were you up at the top of the leaderboards in the slant last week?
Yes. Yeah. So actually, I had one lineup that was a Lions Bears mix that had like elements of the Giants, Cowboys game, which ended up being like the perfect combination. So I was winning the slant for a good portion of the 1 p.m. window. Ended up finishing second place, and that same lineup finished 14th in the overall Millie Maker, like the $20 Millie
Oh,
Maker.
nice.
Yeah. If there was a 555 Millie Maker, and if I had entered my 150 set into that for like 70 something $1,000, I would have won the Millie Maker. But that's just not the way. That's not the bankroll that I'm playing with.
Yeah. It's that's nice ROI though if you get it.
Yeah. I wanted to give a shout out to my friend Pat, who's a real life human being friend that I have here in Virginia. He actually won the Game Changer on DraftKings. So that was a $100,000 payday for him.
That's
so
awesome.
Congratulations, Pat. I actually meant to shout him out on the 444 DFS MVP podcast that I know he listens to. I think he watches this show too.
Nice.
So shout out to Pat.
Yeah, I was I was in the slant because I always play it, and then I was kind of looking up at the top, and we had JD Atlas from OWS subscriber was like he had several rosters in the top 10, so I was kind of looking at him, and I was like, oh, there's Squirrel right up there, and so and then we had a bunch of rosters in the top 100 this last week, but nobody was able to take it down. I had one. My thesis on Amon-Ra St. Brown was like the game has to play out a certain way for him to get the volume, but my thesis was like, the Lions are going to be aggressive here and they're going to crush the Bears, right? And so things played out that way. But I was like 25% Jameson Williams and like 4% Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I had a roster that was Amon-Ra St. Brown and it was like three of the hybrid. It was Adunze, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb. No, not CeeDee Lamb. It was somebody else who hit. Like it was like three of the guys who had big games. Jamar Chase, like all in a roster together with Mac Jones to make it all fit. And then there's like a couple pieces that made it fall apart. But so yeah, I had some shots and a bunch of stuff that did well, but no major takedowns. So but happy with the way my seasons started. And always cool to see, success from the communities, from the people who, know what they're doing like you. And let's roll that forward into this week. How are you feeling about this week's slate?
Yeah, so it's a massive 13 game slate. I think that's about as big as it can get because we have one game Thursday night, one game Sunday night, one game Monday night. And no bye weeks right yet. So the 13 game slate, and the first thing, well, there's two things that stick out to me. The first thing is the game totals. You have one game that's really sitting out, the 50.5 point game total between Chicago and Dallas. So we should at least touch on that game, whether we want to be over the field or under the field. Every other game on the slate is between 41.5 and 46.5 in terms of game total. And then we also have some, we're starting to get the real injuries hitting. We have Jordan Mason's looking like chalk this week with Aaron Jones going on IR. We also have Jaden Daniels out now for Washington. So we have and JJ McCarthy was declared out after pricing was set. Joe Burrow was out. So I'm saying the four highest projected quarterbacks generally that we have who are all on the main slate last week, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, and Joe Burrow, they're all gone. Lamar, I think and Lamar Jackson. Yeah. So we've got, Mariota and Carson Wentz instead of Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson that we can play.
Yeah. I think it's a good assessment. And kind of like last week, I ended up, Mac Jones was my highest owned quarterback because it was I didn't think that any quarterback was really going to separate and put the slate out of reach. And if Goff hadn't done it, well, and Russell Wilson too, but people weren't really on Russ. But if Goff hadn't done it, Mac Jones was the way to go, right? Because he put up 22 points at 4K, and I was like, well, then you just save salary and you're not getting behind the field. It's funny with Goff last week. I kept going back and forth on where to put him in my player grid. It was up in my tier 1 game stacks, and then they finally ended up in my betas, which is just my large field only play. And he was the only quarterback that I didn't put on any of my single entry 3 max. Had 4% of them, but not on my single entry 3 max. But yeah, I think that we get the same thing from Carson Wentz, and I was saying this in my Angles podcast earlier. If we go back to the start of last year and the perception around Sam Darnold at the start of last year versus the perception around Carson Wentz at the start of this year, I would argue that the perception around Carson Wentz as a quarterback and a ceiling play at the start of this year would be higher than the perception around Sam Darnold at the start of last year. And in this offense with Kevin O'Connell, the same thing with last week where it was like, well, Mac Jones is a great fit for this offense. He has been a productive NFL quarterback. He's inconsistent. You maybe don't want him as your long-term starter if you're an NFL franchise, but he can produce. I kind of see Wentz the same way this week, and I think that because everybody's going to be on Jordan Mason, which to me I'm like, yeah, he's starting. He's not going to play 90% of the snaps. He's not going to catch a lot of passes, or at least not a schemed passing game work. If everybody's going to be on Jordan Mason, like Wentz plus Justin Jefferson to me is such awesome leverage this week because Wentz has like 25, 26 plus DraftKings points in 4 of his last 9 starts. He has 31 plus in 2 of his last 9. He likes to throw the ball downfield. Kevin O'Connell always has guys open down the field. So yeah, I actually kind of like that angle this week. You got any thoughts on that one?
I do, yeah. So I think we're on different sides of the $4,000 quarterback on DraftKings because I really like Marcus Mariota, but I like Carson Wentz as well. I think it brings out a classic but very significant difference between FanDuel and DraftKings. Then on FanDuel, I think my number one quarterback is Caleb Williams. That he's in the high total game. I think he at least deserves consideration, even if you're not high on that game. You just don't get that much for dropping down in salary on FanDuel. On DraftKings, you do. Like, you need that salary on DraftKings. And so being able to just get a $4,000 starting quarterback is a significant difference. I think that elevates Wentz and Marcus Mariota over the other like quarterbacks I'd want to consider, like Caleb Williams and Dak Prescott from the high total game. I think I do prefer Marcus Mariota, but I actually, part of it is a thought process in my mind that we're seeing so often now, these quarterbacks that were highly drafted go to a different team, right? Like Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and then perform really well. Like Marcus Mariota was one of those guys we talked about teams tanking for him when he was going to go when he was still in college, right? Going to go into the NFL draft. Teams are tanking so they can get Marcus Mariota, and now he's just been a backup for a couple of years. But I think he fits the system in Washington well. Like he's a rushing quarterback, which is great for fantasy. It also helps like when he goes in to play for Washington, like they are used to having a system for a quarterback that can run as well as pass. But I think Carson Wentz is in a good situation as well. And I think that you brought up a good idea that like Justin Jefferson is very appealing there. Like that if you're stepping into this situation as a backup quarterback, you want to have an excellent wide receiver, that you can throw to. Like, what if Carson Wentz is just feeding Justin Jefferson the ball? The Bengals defense is not a defense we want to shy away from. And you are getting some leverage there over like on Jordan Mason. Like if Jordan Mason is not punching in touchdowns, like he's not necessarily putting up a great score, and he's not really that low priced, right? Like because he was already getting some work anyway, so he's not like full backup running back price. He's like 5,400, which is like more of like mid range. Like there's like still some usable running backs that are priced beneath him. So yeah, I think you'd be getting some leverage on the field. So I like both cheap quarterbacks, maybe more on the Mariota side, but I think Wentz and Jefferson is a very appealing combination.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much on brand for you to be on that Mariota side, just from like the running. I mean, it's all the things you're saying fit for Wentz too. Obviously, like he'll run the ball. He was the number 2 overall draft pick. He was a former MVP front runner late into a season. Bounced around a lot more than Mariota has, but also in a good situation for his skill set. So yeah, I think both these guys are very much in the mix. I also don't think, I know that we save salary, but I always think about like, I don't know, like at defense or at tight end or something, like $1,000 in salary doesn't matter that much, that you can get up to Caleb Williams and Dak Prescott. What are your thoughts on that game? I mean, obviously there's pathways to that game taking off. What are your overview thoughts on that game environment and how you're thinking about handling it?
So I think I'll actually handle it pretty similar to the way I was thinking about like Chicago and Detroit last week, that I think if I want to play that game, I think I want to massively stack it. And actually some of the appeal in that game is also that like the receivers we want to get to aren't that expensive. So like Rome Odunze is not that expensive. I think on DraftKings, he's still cheaper than DJ Moore. I think the reverse is true on FanDuel. But they're both like they're priced, I think, within 100 or 200 of each other on both sites. Dunze is actually the cheaper one on DraftKings, which is like he's got 3 touchdown receptions already this year. DJ Moore doesn't have any. And George Pickens actually in that game is pretty affordable as well. CeeDee Lamb is the only receiver in that game you'd have to really spend up for. And I like the idea of like overstacking that game. So if I'm playing Caleb Williams, I probably want to play at least 2 receivers from the Bears, or like Colston Loveland, the tight end. Maybe he's only 3,200. Maybe it's the week they want to start getting him more involved. Like we see what Tyler Warren has been doing for the Colts. Like Loveland was a first round draft pick at tight end, I think picked before Warren.
Yeah.
So
kind of surprisingly, but yeah.
Yeah, so I like the idea if you're playing Caleb Williams, like stacking with at least 2 or 3 receivers or pass catchers, then also a couple of people from Dallas, and that's a still a highly projected lineup that's getting a bunch of pieces from that game. I'd do the same thing if I'm playing Dak Prescott, like play a couple of guys from Dallas, like maybe Jake Ferguson and one of CeeDee Lamb or George Pickens, and then 1 or 2 of the Bears guys, and I think you can actually throw the running backs in as well. Like I might pair Swift with Dak Prescott or Javonte Williams with Caleb Williams, but like overstack that game. Like you're saying, if that's the high total game and it actually takes off and exceeds its total, I want to have as many pieces as possible.
Yeah, I think there's probably a false perception around this game because of how badly the Lions stomped the Bears, and then how many points were scored in Giants Cowboys. Like the run out on that Giants Cowboys game was crazy. It was like, I think it was like 23 total points halfway through the third quarter, and then things flipped, right? And I think watching the Cowboys, it's very clear that their approach to winning games is not to throw the ball 45 times. Like they want to be, and we've seen more and more of these successful teams, the Lions and the Eagles and the Packers, and like they're building big up front, they're running the ball, and then they're throwing the ball less often, but taking downfield shots, right? And it's like, that's kind of what the Cowboys look like they want to be doing. And so I think Caleb Williams has to do well in this game to force the Cowboys to get aggressive. But I also think for the case to the upside, there's a clear case to the downside. For the case to the upside, you have a Matt Eberflus defense that's very rules-based. It's very much like, we do this and these are your keys and you do this if this guy does this. And like really smart coaches know how to exploit those rules. And Ben Johnson's played against Eberflus a lot. All these players on the Bears played for Eberflus, so like they know the rules of this defense. So I do think that there's clear pathways to this game playing to the upside on a week where, like, if this game doesn't hit, we could have no games hitting for like shootout. So I think it's worth it, even though it's going to be popular. To me, it's still a game that it stands out as one that I want to have focus on. But I'm also going to have like you, I'm going to be treating it like a true shootout when I'm building around the game, and then yeah, like I'm going to have some rosters that say, what if that game underwhelms, and just go totally different direction. I like your shout on the running backs, dude. Like Javonte Williams, who everybody in DFS used to love way more than I did. I was always like, I don't get what you all see in Javonte Williams. And now everybody, like, he burned everybody so badly for so long, everyone hates him. And I'm watching him like, he looks pretty good. Like, and he looks good in this offense, and they like him. They're using him. And so, yeah, I think that's a good shout too on like touching on these running backs in this game as well.
I heard somebody talk about Javonte Williams, and they say, I think he's still got more left in the tank than I thought. I was like, he's only 25 years old. Like he's not that old. Like it seems like he's been around forever because he had a knee injury and came back from the knee injury. Had a year after the knee injury where he wasn't all that effective in Denver, but now he's in Dallas. And like we've seen with knee injuries, sometimes it actually takes a couple of years until you're like actually back to full strength. If you ever get there, but if you get there, sometimes it can take a couple of years. And I think Javonte Williams might be in a pretty good spot going forward. And this is with a super high total game, I think he's in a good position this week. But he might actually just be the guy in Dallas and be a talented running back. Yeah.
And it was like not just a knee injury, but a pretty devastating one. So it would make sense for it to take longer for him to come back from that. And, my thing with, actually, we can take this back to the Jordan Mason discussion. Like, my thing with, I think we're still at a point in the season where there are guys who are underpriced. I had that list last week. I don't know if you saw it, but I had a list, like no wide receivers were really standing out to me. So I just made a list of, I think it was 7 guys who was like, all of these guys are going to be priced $1K higher or more later in the season. And I listed like their price tag and where I expected them to be priced later in the year. Right. And I just kind of mixed and matched guys from that list. And that included Roma Dunze and JSN and Teteroa and McMillan. And it was like, yeah, nothing's really standing out to me. So let's just take the guys who are clearly underpriced. And so I think we're still at a point in the season where there are guys who are clearly underpriced. And I think Javonte Williams is priced pretty appropriately. Like he might bounce up to 6,400, like a James Conner type range, but we're not getting value on him. But then when I think about Jordan Mason, I'm like, if Jordan Mason had this role for 8 weeks, what's his price getting up to? 6,100? Like he's not that underpriced either. So I just don't think we really have any clearly underpriced guys at running back, which means I think Javonte Williams, especially at lower ownership, is as sharp as anything.
Actually, a guy I've been low on pretty much all throughout the late best ball season when he started to become relevant is Corey Krosky-Merritt, right at the same price range. And I was wondering, like, kind of speculating if Austin Eckler had gotten injured on Monday night instead of Thursday, that would we be talking about JCM a lot more because he's right in he's kind of the same style of running back as Jordan Mason. He's at the same price tag. He's now stepping into a bigger role potentially because of injury to a starter. Yeah, it's the Austin Eckler was the official starter in Washington. It's the difference between Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt and Jordan Mason is nowhere near as big a difference as the ownership is going to reflect. They're the same price. They're kind of in the same situation. Jordan Mason's going to see a much higher ownership than JCM.
Yeah, I'm a buyer of that. I mean, we can get these even when we're trying to be neutral. We can get these biases based on I still love Josh Allen because we were early on Josh Allen in 2018. I was on Bill. I had my first post on X about him was August 1st. Where it was people weren't on that yet, and so now that it's played out that way, I love this guy. Right? I'm like, oh, this is the guy. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that one. And I think Jordan Mason's a better play on paper, but not by a significant margin. And the ownership delta will be significant. So yeah, I like that shout there. Definitely a sharp way to look at that one.
And actually, now that it's almost like a mirror image of the Jordan Mason situation, if Marcus Mariota starts to get some steam at the quarterback position, why wouldn't Washington maybe emphasize the rushing game behind their young running back a little bit more? So you could be getting some potential leverage off of Marcus Mariota. Play Carson Wentz, JCM lineup.
Justin Jefferson, JCM. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, that's the all leverage lineup.
But no, I like that.
We should maybe talk about any other game situations beyond the Chicago Dallas, because that's the one that stands out. But is there anything, because all of the other games are kind of grouped in around the same total? You had mentioned maybe no other game takes off. If another game takes off, are there any that are sticking out to you?
Yeah, I have actually kept forgetting to mention this one. And I was doing my podcast. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about this one. Atlanta, Carolina. I think it was 36-30 in week 18 last year. The Panthers defense has improved, but I think we have to take that with a grain of salt. They've definitely improved, but the way they looked against the Vikings was a function of JJ McCarthy, not a function of, and they're like, oh, this is the highest pressure rate that the Falcons have had through 3 quarters in 6 years. And you're like, yeah, because JJ McCarthy holds the ball way too long. Pressure is going to get there, So I think that can still turn into a high scoring game. All of these are underdogs turning to high scoring games, but these are just the ones I see. I think Houston and Jacksonville, where you have a Houston offense that still looks a little broken, a Houston defense that's really good, but it's a divisional game with explosive weapons. So you could see that one shooting out. Then Indy and Tennessee, where I think Tennessee is a much more competitive team than people realize. And if the Colts are able to score points and sort of force Brian Callahan to get aggressive in his play calling, Cam Ward is willing to be aggressive. So that's another one that I could see playing to the upside. And then last one is Denver and Chargers. So none of these are ones where I'm like, oh, I want to play these. But when I'm mixing and matching, large field entries, I'm like, okay, I want 4% of Herbert and 3 or 4% of Bo Nix. I want 4% Michael Penix and 4% Bryce Young is kind of how I'm looking at it. I'm not seeing anything from these that I'm Mariota, I wasn't as big on. Now after talking to you, that's going to be one where I'm like, okay, maybe I got to rethink that one. Mariota, Mac Jones, Carson Wentz, and the Cowboys and Bears game is kind of single entry 3 max to me. And then these other ones are, hey, this could shoot out. Let me take a shot on it in large field play. But are you seeing any of these that might push for tighter builds for you?
I'll say I like maybe a skinny stack of Daniel Jones. He's another one of those quarterbacks, fits the mold, highly drafted quarterback. kind of wears out his welcome with his first team, and they're ready to move on, and then goes somewhere else. Like, oh wow, this guy's got a lot of like ability, right?
Yeah.
Same ability we saw when he was drafted in the top 10 of all NFL picks. Another team, maybe a better coaching situation, change of scenery, whatever you want to call it, and whatever it actually is, brings out suddenly a quarterback that looks like he can handle a starting role in the NFL. I'll say actually the almost said San Diego, the Chargers Denver game is one actually sticks out to me. If I'm going to game stack another game, I think it's really interesting to stack that game. I don't think you need to go as berserk as I was talking about with like the Chicago Dallas game, but that game's got the second highest total of the week of the slate, or at least, which is I found really surprising. The 46.5 point total. The Chargers allowed the fewest points in the NFL last season. Their defense allowed the fewest points. Denver's defense allowed the third fewest points in the NFL. They're playing each other, and suddenly it's got the second highest total out of 13 games. But there's a reason. I think you could play from either side. I probably prefer the Justin Herbert side. I think you can play from the Bo Nix side as well, though. Bo Nix tends to add some points with his rushing yards. But yeah, I mean, I think those defenses are maybe not as shy away defenses as they've been previously. Like the total indicates that there could be some points scored in that game, and we wouldn't have necessarily gone there like last year against these defenses.
Yeah. I mean, I would contend personally that the Chargers are even more of a stay away than in the past. But it's like I was saying this earlier. Like I don't want to bet on a bad offense against a bad defense, because a bad offense is bad, but a good offense can often beat a good defense. And then a competitive, really the Broncos should be 2-0. And so you got two teams that are fighting for first place in a division that might finally be up for grabs for the first time in almost a decade. And this is a hugely important game with, a Chargers team that's been more aggressive this year, a Broncos team that's very happy and willing to be aggressive. So yeah, it's just like one of those where, to me, you could see that the two offenses just being good enough and aggressive enough to break through to where like field goals become touchdowns, right? You're going forward on fourth down maybe a little bit more often. And maybe you go for fourth down on your own side of the field, and that turns into points for the other team. And then you go for fourth down on the other team's side of the field and, end up scoring a touchdown that drive instead of a field goal. And it just sort of like the fact that both these teams are going to be kind of aggressive minded can just lead to the points piling up. So yeah, I think that the total, you shouting out the total, which obviously isn't something that I spend a lot of time looking at, but that's like a great call there, because that does kind of back up what I was seeing with this being one of these games where it's like, yeah, I don't want to play it, but if there's going to be a game that does take off, this seems like one where you could look up and it's like 34-31, right? Nobody was expecting it.
Yeah. I guess I want to talk about the running back position as well, because there's an interesting maybe decision point depending on how you're allocating your salary. And a couple of games, we just briefly touched on, but like Christian McCaffrey versus Bijan Robinson. McCaffrey could be getting Brock Purdy back this week. I don't know if we have like official word on what the practice situation was with the 49ers. But any thoughts on and I know Bijan Robinson is facing a Carolina rush defense, allowed the most rushing yards per game, like by a pretty healthy margin last season. It hasn't looked that much better this year. So he's in a good spot. But any thoughts on Bijan versus McCaffrey in those two games, Atlanta, Carolina, which you touched on briefly, and then Arizona and San Francisco?
Yeah, well, I personally like the idea of trying to play both of them together, because they're both going to be somewhat high owned, but they won't be played together a lot. I don't know that I might have equal exposure to the two of them. And honestly, Saquon Barkley, I'm such a matchup guy at running back, and it's easy for me to be like, oh, Rams defense is so good, I don't want Saquon Barkley. He smashed in this matchup 2 times last year, so I think people aren't really going to him. I think all three of these guys are in play, but I don't know that there's a clear separator. Clearly Bijan and CMC look better on paper, but I don't know that there's a clear separator between the two. And I don't know that I'll have a significant ownership delta among any of these three this week. What are your thoughts on these guys?
I think they're right about even. I think it's noteworthy, and I'll add another FanDuel pricing take, that Bijan is cheaper than McCaffrey on DraftKings, and the reverse is true on FanDuel. So it actually leads me a little bit towards the idea I should be over Bijan Robinson on DraftKings, over the field on Bijan Robinson on DraftKings, over the field on Christian McCaffrey on FanDuel, and just take the little bit of money savings on both sites and for every lineup and try to do something. I agree. I think they're both in good spots. I think it's interesting because we're talking about all these $4,000 quarterbacks, and I think there's a bunch of wide receivers we can play in the fairly cheap range of pricing. Maybe not down to like the range, but like these Chicago and Dallas wide receivers are just not that expensive. Like there's a lot you can find, kind of 6,000 ish. Ted McMillan is only still below 6,000. He's 5,900. Kobe Meyer is 5,600. Like take all these savings and do something. And one of those things you can do is like spend up something that's maybe a little bit more reliable than Jordan Mason touchdowns, right? And that tends to be like Christian McCaffrey receptions, or Bijan Robinson, getting in the end zone, putting up a pretty good yardage day. So the idea of like taking the savings at wide receiver and quarterback and spending up at running back is pretty appealing.
Yeah, 100% with you there. And I think it'll be people just don't like to double pay up at running back. So you just don't see a lot of those rosters, which immediately makes them unique. So yeah, but the way I always say it is like if CMC scores 35 and Bijan scores 35, like, yeah, they're both high owned, but most people aren't getting both of those scores. And if they're the only guy scoring 35 and you get both of them, you're so far ahead of the field. So yeah, that idea of just building it a little differently is attractive to me this week. Running back feels thin too. It's like the running backs in Bears and Cowboys. There's Jordan Mason. There's maybe Travis Etienne. People could say Bill Merritt, Bill Krosky Merritt, or maybe Jalen Warren, but it's like it's kind of thin, and then you get up to these expensive guys. So is there anybody else that you're kind of leaning toward that I'm missing there?
At the running back position, maybe some Jalen Warren. I think deserves a mention, and that's a game that also maybe has a little bit of a higher total than people would have thought. You've got Pittsburgh and New England, so like Jalen Warren, I think deserves some consideration. I guess maybe Alvin Kamara is a guy that can always suddenly he's got 8 receptions, and it's like, oh wow, he put up like 30 points, and those guys can really get a lot of receptions. I feel like he hasn't done that as much with Spencer Rattler. One guy I'll mention, like Bucky Irving. I think if the Jets can't stop the run and can't put up points behind Tyrod Taylor, like the Bucks, Tampa Bay could just be rushing the ball behind Bucky Irving. But yeah, did you want to mention something on Kamara?
No, I did want to mention, you mentioned Saints. So this is a JM special, and I don't think you typically go towards stuff like this, but these combo plays, or you just add 2 guys and treat them like one player in terms of the salary you're spending, especially in smaller field single entry. Shaheed plus Juwan Johnson cost 8.5K. They've averaged 17.5 targets per game. Olave plus Juwan Johnson cost 9.1K. They've averaged 21.5 targets per game. They're throwing the ball a ton. They're running this hurry up, no huddle, throw the ball, short area throws. And I just think of both those, those 3 guys are all going to get targets, right? So one of them's probably going to hit for a nice score here, and just getting 2 of them, you actually kind of build in a solid floor of points for a roster in single entry 3 max.
I'll add an additional point to that point that I think I'm going to end up with probably over the field on the Saints. I'm not going to end up over the field on Saints stacks, but I think I'm going to be playing so much Jackson Smith and Jigba and looking to run that back with somebody on a stack of a different game, right? So maybe playing a lot of Chicago, Dallas, or maybe Chargers, Broncos, but then I've got Jackson Smith and Jigba because I think he's so ridiculously underpriced. And then, can I figure out a Saints player that's maybe lower owned that differentiates this lineup? And I think Rashid Shaheed is going to be a guy I just love playing Shaheed because compare Shaheed to Keenan Allen, who I think will see some ownership. Keenan Allen tends to be much more reliable, getting some receptions. Shaheed is a guy that catches the ball, runs 80 yards, and suddenly he's adding a chunk of fantasy points, and then turning the ball back over to would be the Seattle offense in this case. Where then maybe Jackson Smith and Jigba is getting 4 or 5 receptions on a drive. So yeah, I like the call on being over the field on the Saints. I think the guy I'd prefer is probably Shaheed, and then Olave, and then Juwan Johnson. But Juwan Johnson is also at the position where there's very little opportunity cost in tight end. Yeah.
I think the Saints offense call is sharp, and my only concern is because the Saints offense has genuinely looked good. But not elite, but good. They've been playing in the dome, with their home fans, where they're able to kind of run this no huddle and communicate. Whereas it's going to be harder in Seattle to communicate with all that noise. But if they can do it, then I think that they have a shot to be another week where it's oh wow, Saints produced some solid scores and nobody was really on them, and then we can be on them and take advantage of that.
So I guess one last thing that I wanted to talk about, a game we haven't mentioned at all, Green Bay, Cleveland, is just a game. Like there is no rule that you have to play something from or consider something from every game. Is there anything in Green Bay, Cleveland that you'd consider or just write off that game pretty much entirely?
I think that it's a game where like I'm not going to argue against Green Bay pass catchers, but I don't think I'm going to go there myself because like their whole offense is we're gonna run the ball and then we're gonna do downfield passing off that. But that's inherently lower volume. So then if you don't get the yards and the touchdowns, then you don't get the points. And then so not every week is it going to produce the yards and touchdowns. And then when it does, you don't necessarily know who it's going to be. So like it won't surprise me if somebody from the Packers posts a nice score. But I think you're like, to me, the math doesn't make a ton of sense on finding that guy because I don't see Joe Flacco's so immobile now that I don't see how the Browns do well on offense against this version of this Packers defense. So then that kind of just tilts me toward being like, well, like I don't see the Packers having to throw it 35 to 40 times. And so then you're just hoping to guess right on who gets the big plays. So yeah, I don't know. You have somebody you're wanting to try to guess right on that team, or are you staying away yourself?
No, I was actually going to say that for the most part, I'm probably going to stay away from the game. And then I realized Tucker Kraft, I think, didn't practice today. And Luke Musgrave is like 2,700. So that is actually something where a piece from that game could become like maybe a little bit chalkier or at least like deserves mention. I think if Kraft misses, like Musgrave is a guy that I'd go to as a value tight end at 2,700 in a lot of lineups. But other than that, there's nothing in particular. I think Judkins, the Browns running back, there will be a game or a week where he starts to look really good. It's probably not against the Packers defense, though.
Yeah, we can take some signals and then be ready to pounce when the time is right to actually make some money off of it. Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I don't have like strong arguments against one of the Packers pass catchers. It's just not probably where I'm going to go this week.
All right. So any closing thoughts?
No, nothing for me this week.
Yeah. All right. That'll do it for this week, everybody. Good luck this weekend. Hope to see you at the top of the leaderboards, and we will catch you next week.